If The Last of Us Part 1 was about love, Part 2 was about hate, then The Last of Us Part 3 needs to be about finding peace. Peace with the love that was lost. Peace with the hate that fueled a life-altering crusade. And simply, peace within. A third game in the series is undeniably needed to resolve the events of the second game. For Part 2 to simply be how Ellie's story ends would be unfair to her character. In Part 2, she is unrelentingly punished, and from a story writing aspect, it left me saying, why? I can understand the thinking as to why Joel needed to be dealt with in such a violent way. His actions may have doomed the entire human race out of selfishness. I understand how, thematically, the story can be justified in treating him the way that it did. But why Ellie? She did nothing to deserve the pain she's put through. But regardless, this is where we find her now. Broken and alone. Again, if this was the last we ever see of her, then what was the point? You essentially turned a pure soul into an emotionally destroyed husk of a person. Now, I believe a storyteller has every right to tell you that kind of story. But there has to be meaningful reasons that brought our character to that place. Now, look at Breaking Bad. Probably the best example of how to take everything away from a character. But in Breaking Bad, all that happened to Walt was of his own doing. His lust for power was his ultimate downfall. But there were hundreds of decisions along the way that placed him where he ended up. His pride and his greed consumed him, and when we see him in that final ascending shot, you realize that he himself is the cause for his undoing. There is no one to blame but him. In the end, it wasn't the cancer that killed him. It wasn't his family he was doing this all for, but himself. That's why when we see him lose it all, his family, his empire, his life, from a story point of view, his demise is justified. But there is none of that with Ellie. Sure, she's hell-bent on revenge, but who wouldn't be? The closest person in her life was killed in front of her, and she feels justified in pursuing his killer. Is killing wrong? Yeah. But does her actions carry enough weight to have her end up the way she does? No, not at all. Realistically, we see her make one questionable decision. Hunt down Joel's killer. We see her change for sure, but not in such a drastic way that the story needs her to lose everything. So by the time we see that last shot of her walking away from the window, her position doesn't feel deserving. There's really no justification to have her be in such a tragic place. And this is why we need a third game. We have now seen her at her lowest point, and a character like Ellie deserves redemption. In her final confrontation with Abby, we see her let Abby go. She proved she was the bigger person, and she deserves to be rewarded for that. Now, she doesn't need to forgive Abby, but she needs to find some peace within herself for everything she went through in this game. She needs closure with the death of Joel. She needs to find some resolve from this grasp of vengeance on her heart. And she deserves some peace at last. Now, a very simple way to start this could even be her learning to play guitar with her left hand so she can play Joel's song. And one thing I find interesting is we see Ellie in the same place emotionally that we saw Joel at the beginning of the first game. She's lost the person she loved the most and is simply just existing in this dark and depraved world. So with the third title, it would be great to have it mirror the first game and have Ellie come across someone like herself as a young girl to bring that humanity back out of her. Maybe Dina dies in a similar fashion to Tess in the first game and Ellie has to take care of JJ. and through their bond and his innocence, she can become closer to the young, joyful kid she used to be. In terms of plot, we could have rumors of the Fireflies looking for another cure, and Ellie decides to go looking for them. What if we saw JJ get bit, and in a last effort to save him, she goes under the knife, sacrificing herself to ensure that he lives? This plot could even have Ellie and Abby meet once again and somehow find closure between the two of them. Now, do I trust Neil to keep Ellie alive? No. Maybe there's a new doctor who can do the surgery and you think that it will kill Ellie. But in a big twist, it didn't end up killing her, but they were still able to produce a cure. Now what about this? What if that doctor was Abby after following in her father's footsteps? Now that could be an interesting scene. That's actually fucking genius. But in summary, The Last of Us Part 3 has a very special opportunity to show why Part 2 had to play out the way it did. It has the opportunity to show why these characters had to go through such hell. Like the tattoo of the moth on Ellie's arm, maybe Part 2 was Ellie in her cocoon stage. This messy period of growth where a young larva is broken down to its very building blocks only to evolve into another being altogether. Now, I truly hope this is the case, and I truly hope when it's all said and done, Ellie can find some peace.